An unexpected visitor in the night. The rain poured steadily over the quiet streets of Seattle, a city that rarely fell silent. But as midnight approached, Cielo, the small bistro run by Chef Raphael, was finally winding down. It had been another successful evening, with satisfied diners and a kitchen filled with the scents of rosemary, garlic, and simmering sauces. Raphael, a man with lean, graceful movements and a piercing gaze, took a deep breath as he turned off the final oven. This little bistro was his life, a haven he built with tireless hands and a relentless heart. As he finished stacking clean dishes and wiping down his workspace, a faint sound from the alley caught his attention. He froze, listening closely. It was a dull thud, followed by a rustle that didn't quite fit the usual sounds of Seattle nightlife. Initially, Raphael dismissed it as the wind or a stray animal, but something compelled him to step closer to the back door. Perhaps it was a remnant of his own childhood, a reminder of those nights spent scavenging on the streets, long before he became the skilled chef he was today. Curiosity got the better of him, and he opened the back door, stepping into the misty, cold night. The scent of rain mixed with the faint aroma of damp garbage from the alleyway. Under the dim glow of a streetlight, Raphael spotted a small figure huddled by the dumpster. A young girl, maybe 10 or 11, her thin clothes clinging to her rain-soaked skin, was digging frantically through the trash, her movements hurried and desperate. The girl was so focused on her task that she didn't notice him at first. Raphael's eyes widened as he took in her condition. Her cheeks were sunken, her eyes hollow, and her hands trembled as they sifted through scraps. But what struck him most was the unnatural roundness of her belly, which protruded under her torn sweater. It wasn't just a slight bloat from hunger. This looked like a pregnant belly, though she was far too young for that. "Hey, are you all right?" Raphael called out softly, not wanting to startle her. The girl froze, her head snapping up to meet his gaze. For a moment, they stood there in silence, rain pouring between them. Her eyes were wide with fear and mistrust, like a cornered animal. She clutched a soggy piece of bread to her chest, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. I'm not here to hurt you," Raphael said, taking a step back to show he meant no harm. "Are you hungry? I have fresh food inside. Warm food." The girl's eyes flicked toward the bistro door, but quickly darted back to Raphael, suspicion etched across her face. She shook her head, clutched the bread tighter, and backed into the shadows of the alley. Before Raphael could say anything more, she turned and bolted, disappearing into the darkness. Raphael stood there, frozen, feeling the strange mix of guilt, concern, and helplessness. He wanted to run after her, to offer her more than scraps, but he knew from experience that pressing her would only scare her further. With a heavy heart, he turned back inside, closing the door but leaving it unlocked, just in case she returned. As he made his way back to the kitchen, Raphael's thoughts lingered on the girl's face, her empty eyes, and that swollen belly that haunted him. Something was very wrong, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far from over. That night, as Raphael lay in bed, he couldn't find peace. The girl's image replayed in his mind over and over, the look of utter despair, the desperation in her movements. He tried to imagine what kind of life had led her to that alley, and a pang of empathy gnawed at him. He'd been that kid once, scavenging for food, feeling invisible to the world. And now, as a chef with the power to help, he couldn't ignore her plight. Sleep eluded him, so he got up, made himself a cup of coffee, and began formulating a plan. A plan in motion. The next morning, Chef Raphael arrived at Cielo early, his mind still preoccupied with the girl from the night before. The rain had cleared, but the sky remained overcast, matching his heavy mood. Every corner of his kitchen reminded him of the warmth and comfort he could offer, and he felt a renewed urgency to do something for the young girl he'd seen scavenging in the alley. As his team trickled in, Raphael kept his thoughts to himself, avoiding small talk and focusing on preparing for the day's lunch service. But even as he chopped vegetables, and checked inventory. His mind kept drifting back to the alley and the girl's haunted eyes. He knew that, if she was still out there, the cold Seattle nights would be brutal on her frail young body. His instincts told him that there was more to her story, something beyond mere hunger or homelessness. By the time the lunch rush arrived, Raphael had made up his mind. He instructed his sous chef, Matt, to handle the kitchen for a bit and grabbed a brown paper bag, filling it with fresh bread, cheese, and some fruit. As a last-minute thought, he added a small reusable water bottle, hoping she'd accept it. "I'm stepping out for a bit," he said, trying to keep his tone casual as Matt raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay, chef?" Matt asked, sensing Raphael's unease. Raphael hesitated. He wanted to tell Matt everything, but feared he'd be misunderstood or discouraged. "I just need to check on something in the alley. Cover for me if any orders come in." Without waiting for Matt's response, Raphael slipped out through the back door. The alley was empty, just as he expected, with only the faint smell of stale rain and garbage lingering in the air. He walked down the narrow passage, eyes scanning every shadow, hoping to catch a glimpse of the girl. After several minutes, he sighed and turned back toward the bistro, feeling the weight of disappointment settle over him. But just as he was about to re-enter the kitchen, he spotted a familiar figure a few blocks down. The girl was hunched against a brick wall, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if she were trying to hold her body together. Raphael's heart ached at the sight. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. She noticed him halfway down the street, her eyes narrowing with mistrust as she recognized him. "Hey," Raphael said gently, stopping a few feet away. He held out the paper bag. "I brought you some food. Fresh, clean food. You don't have to dig through the trash." The girl eyed the bag suspiciously, her gaze darting from the bag to Raphael's face, as though weighing her options. Her lips parted, and for a moment he thought she might say something, but then she pressed them tightly together again, a silent refusal to let him in. "I know you don't trust me," he continued, keeping his tone soft. "And I get that. But I used to be where you are. I've been on these streets before, hungry, tired, and looking for anything that might keep me going another day." A flicker of something, maybe understanding, passed over her face, but it was gone just as quickly, replaced by the hard shell of defiance she seemed to carry like armor. Raphael sighed, placing the bag on the ground and taking a step back. "It's yours if you want it. There's no catch, no tricks. I just want to help." She stared at the bag, her hands clenched tightly by her sides. For a few long moments, they stood there in silence, the sounds of the bustling city around them contrasting sharply with the stillness between them. Finally, the girl took a tentative step forward, her eyes locked onto Raphael as she reached for the bag. She grabbed it quickly, clutching it to her chest, as though afraid he might snatch it back. Raphael took a step back, respecting her space, and watched as she opened the bag and peered inside. Her expression softened for a brief moment when she saw the bread and fruit, a glimpse of the child she might have been before life hardened her. "What's your name?" Raphael asked softly. She looked up, her face wary. "Nina," she murmured, so quietly that Raphael almost didn't hear her. "Nina. That's a beautiful name," he said, a soft smile forming on his lips. "I'm Raphael. I'm a chef at that restaurant over there." He pointed toward Cielo, but she barely glanced in its direction, still clutching the bag. Raphael wanted to ask her so many questions, where she lived, if she had family, if she was hurt. But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was coiled tight like a spring, ready to run at any moment. He knew he had to tread carefully. "Is it okay if I come by now and then? Just to check if you need anything?" he asked, his tone gentle. Nina's gaze hardened, her mouth setting into a firm line. "I don't need help," she said, her voice sharper than he'd expected. "I can take care of myself." "I know," Raphael replied calmly. "You're clearly strong. But Sometimes, even strong people need a little help. I'm not asking for anything in return. Just, let me make sure you're okay." She didn't respond, but her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. Raphael took that as a small victory and nodded. "I'll leave you to eat in peace," he said, stepping back. "But remember, I'm at Cielo if you need anything." As Raphael turned to walk away, he heard a faint whisper behind him. "Thank you." He didn't look back, but the quiet gratitude in her voice stayed with him as he returned to the bistro. Inside, Matt was waiting, hands on his hips, a curious smile on his face. "Everything all right out there?" Matt asked, trying to keep the tone light. Raphael nodded, a strange sense of hope blossoming in his chest. "Yeah, everything's fine." But as he returned to the kitchen, Raphael knew he couldn't just let things be. There was a story behind Nina's eyes, one she clearly wasn't ready to share. He resolved to keep an eye out for her, to make sure she didn't disappear back into the shadows, forgotten and alone. Over the next few days, Raphael went about his routine, but his thoughts often drifted to Nina. He left small bags of food near the alley, hoping she'd find them. Sometimes he'd catch a glimpse of her from a distance, watching as she cautiously approached and took the offerings. He noticed how carefully she rationed the food, as if each meal had to last far longer than he'd intended. The sight of her hungrily eating in a hidden corner filled him with a deep, aching sorrow. Finally, on the 5th day, he spotted her again near the alley, just as he was leaving for the night. She was standing under a streetlight, her small frame barely noticeable in the darkening evening. Her face looked pale and drawn, her swollen belly more prominent than ever. Raphael approached slowly, his heart racing with concern. "Nina, are you all right?" She glanced up, a mixture of fear and relief flashing across her face. I don't feel so good," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Without a second thought, Raphael moved closer, concern etched across his face. "Can I take you somewhere safe? I know you don't want to go to a hospital, but maybe somewhere warm where you can rest." Nina hesitated, her small hand gripping her stomach as if she could will away the pain. Finally, she nodded, her expression resigned. Raphael guided her carefully down the street to the small apartment he rented above the bistro. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and he could make sure she had a comfortable place to rest. As they entered, he led her to the couch and fetched a blanket, draping it over her shoulders. She looked around the modest apartment, her gaze lingering on the worn but cozy furniture and the small, tidy kitchen. Raphael brought her a glass of water and watched as she took a shaky sip, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely a whisper. As he sat beside her, Raphael felt the weight of her suffering and the stories she hadn't told. He knew it would take time for her to trust him fully, but he was prepared to wait. Fragile trust. Nina's first night in Raphael's apartment was tense, with silence heavy as they both tried to navigate this fragile new arrangement. Raphael had offered her his couch, a soft blanket, and a pillow, and she had accepted them with reluctant gratitude. Her small frame looked almost lost beneath the blanket, her pale face barely visible as she curled up, clutching her belly protectively. Raphael didn't push for conversation. He kept his movements slow and unobtrusive, putting away dishes and tidying up quietly, hoping she'd feel comfortable enough to relax. He knew she was in pain. He'd seen the way she winced whenever she shifted, the haunted look in her eyes that went beyond physical discomfort. But he also knew better than to ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. As he finished tidying up, Raphael glanced over at her. She was awake, her eyes watching him with a guarded intensity, as if trying to understand his intentions. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, then retreated to his bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar in case she needed anything. Lying in bed, he found sleep elusive once again, his mind racing with concerns about her safety and health. He knew he couldn't force her to open up, but he felt a responsibility to help her, whatever it took. Morning arrived with a pale light filtering through the curtains. Raphael awoke early, slipping into the kitchen to start a simple breakfast of oatmeal, honey, and fresh fruit. The comforting smell filled the small apartment, and he hoped it would coax her out of sleep and maybe even ease her guard a little. Eventually, Nina stirred, her cautious eyes darting around as she adjusted to the unfamiliar setting. She looked wary, as though she was preparing herself for whatever expectations might come with his generosity. Raphael greeted her with a warm smile, sliding a bowl of oatmeal onto the table and gesturing to the chair. "I made breakfast," he said gently, trying to keep his tone casual. "It's simple, but it's warm, and good for you." Nina hesitated, eyeing the oatmeal as if it were a trap. But hunger eventually won, and she shuffled over, sliding into the chair without a word. She took a tentative bite, and Raphael saw her expression soften as the warmth of the food melted her initial hesitation. For a brief moment, she looked like any other kid, savoring a rare moment of comfort. He watched her carefully, noting the way she held her stomach, how her thin fingers trembled slightly with each bite. He wanted to ask about her swollen belly, to know if she was sick or injured, but he knew he had to tread carefully. Instead, he tried a different approach. "I grew up in this neighborhood," he said, keeping his tone light. "It wasn't easy, but I got through. Had some hard days, though. I know what it's like to be on your own." Nina paused mid-bite, glancing up at him with a glimmer of curiosity. She didn't say anything, but Raphael sensed he had struck a chord. "Back then, I would have given anything to have a place to go, someone to talk to. I didn't always trust the people who wanted to help, though," he continued, his voice soft. "I had to learn the hard way that not everyone's out to get you." She looked away, her expression unreadable, but she didn't stop eating. He took that as a small sign of progress. "I'm not saying you have to trust me right away," Raphael added gently. "But I'd like to help you, Nana, even if it's just a warm place to sleep and a meal now and then. No strings attached." She finished her oatmeal, setting the spoon down carefully, her fingers lingering on the edge of the bowl as if she wanted to say something but couldn't quite bring herself to do it. After a moment, she finally looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, a mixture of suspicion and vulnerability in her eyes. "What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air, loaded with the weight of her mistrust and the scars left by whatever experiences had taught her to be so wary. Raphael took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I don't want anything from you, Nina. I just know what it's like to be alone and scared. I've been there. And if someone had given me a safe place, even just for a night, I think it would have made a difference," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. Nina looked down, her fingers tracing patterns on the table, as if processing his words. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice barely audible. I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted, her voice laced with exhaustion and a hint of shame. Raphael felt a pang in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral, not wanting to make her feel pitied. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," he replied gently. The offer seemed to surprise her, and she looked at him with a mixture of relief and hesitation. "Just for a little while?" she asked, as though afraid of hoping for more. He nodded, trying to convey warmth and reassurance. "Just as long as you need, Nina." Over the next few days, Raphael did his best to make Nina feel at home. He'd go to work early, preparing her breakfast before heading down to the bistro, and then return in the evenings to make dinner. He noticed how she gradually settled into a routine, eating breakfast, resting on the couch, reading some of the old books he'd left out for her. She rarely spoke, but he sensed her walls beginning to crumble, bit by bit. One evening, as they sat down to dinner, Raphael decided to ask the question that had been gnawing at him since they met. "Nina, I don't mean to pry, but your belly," he began gently, choosing his words carefully. "Are you in pain? Or is it something else? If you're sick, maybe I can help you find someone who can take care of it." Nina tensed, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. Her gaze flickered away, and she bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. After a long, tense pause, she finally spoke, her voice filled with quiet resignation. "It's not. I'm not sick," she said slowly, as though each word was a struggle. "It's because I don't have enough food." Raphael's heart sank. "You mean it's from malnutrition?" She nodded, her face filled with a mixture of shame and frustration. "Sometimes, when you don't eat enough, your stomach, it gets like this. Swollen. It hurts a lot. But I'm used to it." Hearing this, Raphael felt a wave of anger rise within him, not at Nina, but at the circumstances that had left her in this condition. He clenched his fists under the table, struggling to keep his emotions in check. How could anyone, especially a child, be left in such a state, hungry to the point of physical harm? "Well, as long as you're here, you won't go hungry," he said, his voice firm. "I promise you that." Nina looked at him, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes, but it quickly faded. "People make a lot of promises," she murmured, her tone flat. "I don't break my promises," Raphael replied, a quiet intensity in his voice. "I know what it's like to be let down. I won't do that to you." For the first time since she'd arrived, Nina's expression softened, a flicker of trust breaking through her guarded exterior. She seemed to relax, her shoulders releasing a tension she'd held for far too long. As the days passed, Nina slowly began to open up. She told Raphael about her life on the streets, how she'd been abandoned by people she once trusted, left to fend for herself. She talked about the dark corners of the city, the places she'd hidden, and the people she'd met who'd tried to take advantage of her vulnerability. Her voice was steady as she recounted her hardships, but Raphael could see the pain behind her calm demeanor. Raphael listened without judgment, offering quiet words of comfort and assurance. He wanted her to know that she was safe with him, that she didn't have to carry this burden alone. And though she still held back many details, he sensed a growing bond between them, a fragile trust that had been hard-won. One night, as they sat in the quiet of the apartment, Nina turned to him, her expression hesitant but determined. I think I want to stay for a while," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Raphael felt a surge of relief and gratitude. He nodded, keeping his voice steady. "As long as you need, Nina." For the first time, she managed a faint smile, a small but significant gesture that filled Raphael with hope. Uncovering shadows. As weeks passed, Nina grew more comfortable, and Raphael began to see glimpses of her true personality beneath the layers of wariness and mistrust. She had a dry sense of humor, her face lighting up with a rare smile when Raphael joked about his clumsy attempts to make pancakes one Sunday morning. She was sharp and perceptive, noticing small details and even offering a few tips on cleaning and organizing. Little habits she'd picked up from her days trying to survive alone. But despite her progress, Raphael could see that she carried a heavy burden. There were nights when he'd find her on the couch, wide awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression that spoke of sadness and worry far beyond her years. He didn't push, understanding that Nina's journey was one of healing, and healing took time. One evening, Raphael returned from a long day at Cielo to find her sitting at the small kitchen table, looking anxious. Her fingers drummed nervously on the wood, and her eyes darted up when he walked in. "Hey, Nina," he greeted, sensing something was amiss. "Everything all right?" She didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixated on her fingers as they tapped in a steady, restless rhythm. Finally, she looked up, her face filled with a mixture of hesitation and resolve. I don't know if I should stay here anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling. Raphael felt a pang of concern. "Why would you say that? You're safe here, Nina. I meant it when I said you could stay as long as you need." Nina sighed, looking away as though embarrassed. "It's not that. I'm afraid that someone might be looking for me, and I don't want to bring any trouble to you. You've been good to me, and I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Raphael's eyes narrowed, and his heart sank. He had suspected that Nina's life on the streets had been more than just a matter of survival. Her fear went beyond food insecurity and homelessness. It was clear that there was a darker story lurking beneath the surface. He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down, his face gentle but serious. "Nina, if someone's looking for you, then we can figure it out together. But I can't help you unless I know what's going on." She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the door, as if contemplating an escape. But after a long silence, she took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "I ran away," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "From a foster home. The people there, they weren't good. They hurt me. They hurt all of us." Raphael felt a surge of anger and sorrow, but he kept his face calm, not wanting to scare her. "That sounds terrible, Nina. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But you're safe here now, and nobody can hurt you." She looked down, her fingers tracing patterns on the table. "It's not just them," she murmured. "There's someone else. A man. He." She trailed off, visibly struggling with the words. "He's been looking for me. He found me once, in another place I tried to hide. I had to leave everything behind and start over." Raphael's heart raced as he listened, a sense of urgency gripping him. "Nina, is this man dangerous?" She nodded, her face pale. He's not a good person. I don't know what he wants, but I'm scared of him. He's always around like he knows where to find me, no matter where I go." A cold fear settled in Raphael's chest, but he forced himself to stay calm for her sake. "Have you told anyone about him? The police, maybe?" Nina shook her head violently, her eyes wide with terror. "No, I can't go to the police. They'll just send me back to foster care. And he has friends there, people who know him. They'd just tell him where I am." Raphael felt a mixture of frustration and helplessness. The system that was supposed to protect Nina had failed her, and now her fear of being sent back was keeping her from seeking help. He knew he had to find a way to protect her, to offer her a chance at safety and peace, but he wasn't sure how. "Okay, Nina," he said gently, reaching out to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out. You don't have to go to the police if you don't want to, but you can't keep living in fear. We'll find a way to keep you safe." She looked at him, a hint of relief softening her expression. "Thank you, Raphael. I just don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm always running." He gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You're not alone anymore, Nina. We'll face this together, all right." She nodded, her eyes filling with a glimmer of hope. For the first time, Raphael felt a spark of determination igniting within him. He was more than just a chef. He was now her protector, and he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The next day, Raphael began his research. He knew he couldn't go to the police without betraying Nina's trust, but he needed information. He reached out to a few friends he knew from his early days in the neighborhood, people who had connections and might know more about the darker side of the foster care system. Discreetly, he asked them to find out if there were any records of dangerous foster homes or if anyone had reported mistreatment in recent years. Days turned into a week, and Raphael grew anxious. Every time he returned home, he feared Nina would be gone, that she'd taken her fear and left, returning to the streets. But each evening, she was there, sometimes reading one of his books, sometimes drawing aimlessly on scraps of paper. She didn't say much, but Raphael could see a growing sense of security in her eyes, a tentative trust that anchored her to his apartment. One evening, as he was preparing dinner, Raphael received a text from one of his friends, Mario, who ran a small community shelter. He had some information. Raphael's hands trembled slightly as he set the phone down, his heart pounding as he wondered what he was about to uncover. After dinner, he sat Nina down, her face wary as she sensed his tension. He took a deep breath and began, his voice steady. "Nina, I spoke to a friend today. He knows people who work with foster children, People who can help kids in trouble without getting the system involved, he explained. He told me about a place where they can help you without putting you back in foster care. Somewhere safe. Nina's expression shifted, a mixture of fear and hope flashing across her face. You mean, I could go somewhere where he can't find me? Raphael nodded, trying to reassure her. Yes, it's a small place, a safe house where they help kids like you who are trying to escape difficult situations. The people there won't report you or send you back to foster care. You could finally be safe. Nina's eyes filled with a mixture of relief and hesitation. She was silent for a long moment, looking down at her hands as she considered the possibility. Do you think they'd let me stay? Absolutely, Raphael replied gently. They're used to helping kids who have been through hard times. And they're good people, people who actually care. Nina took a shaky breath, her voice barely audible. Okay, I think I'd like to go there. Raphael smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. All right, we'll go together, and I'll make sure you're settled in. You don't have to do this alone. The next morning, Raphael made arrangements with Mario to visit the safe house. They drove in silence, Nana staring out the window, her face expressionless, as they left behind the familiarity of Raphael's apartment and headed into an unfamiliar part of the city. Raphael stole glances at her, sensing her mixed emotions, but he respected her silence, knowing she needed this time to process everything. They arrived at a modest building nestled between two larger complexes. It looked unassuming from the outside, but there was a warmth to it, a sense of safety and security that Raphael hoped Nina could feel. Mario greeted them at the door, his kind eyes and gentle smile putting Raphael at ease. He introduced himself to Nina, his tone warm and welcoming, and led them inside. The interior was cozy and filled with soft lighting, a quiet sanctuary from the bustling world outside. A few other kids sat in a small lounge area, talking softly or reading books, each of them bearing the quiet resilience of those who had survived hardships. Nina looked around, her expression a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Mario guided them to a private office and offered Nina a seat, explaining the rules of the safe house and how she'd be given time and space to heal without any pressure. He assured her that she wouldn't be forced to speak with anyone unless she wanted to, and that she'd have access to counseling if she felt ready. Raphael watched as Nina listened, nodding occasionally, her face showing signs of hope he hadn't seen before. She seemed to recognize the sincerity in Mario's words, the genuine care that radiated from him. When they finished, Mario smiled at Raphael, a silent acknowledgement of the bond he had built with Nina. You're welcome to visit her anytime, Raphael, Mario said kindly. We believe in building communities here. She'll have a family here, but you're part of that too. As Raphael prepared to leave, he knelt beside Nina, his heart heavy but proud. Remember, I'm just a call away, he told her, his voice soft. Anytime you need me, I'll be here. Nina looked at him, her face filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. Thank you, Raphael, for everything. He gave her a reassuring smile. You take care of yourself, okay? You're stronger than you know, Nina. As he left the safe house, Raphael felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had given Nina a chance to rebuild her life, to find peace away from the dangers that had plagued her. But more than that, he felt a profound respect for the resilience she had shown, and a quiet promise to continue helping those who, like her, had been abandoned and forgotten. And as he walked away, he knew that, for both of them, this was just the beginning of a journey toward healing, building bridges and new beginnings. The days that followed were strange and quiet for Raphael. His apartment, once filled with Nina's presence, now felt oddly empty. He found himself instinctively looking toward the couch every morning, expecting to see her curled up under a blanket or reading one of his books. The silence felt heavier without the soft, tentative sounds of her footsteps or the quiet clinking of her spoon against a bowl. Though he was comforted knowing she was safe at the shelter, He missed her deeply. Raphael busied himself at Cielo, immersing himself in his work to distract from the ache of her absence. His team noticed the change. He was quieter, more focused, but a certain lightness seemed to be missing. Matt, his sous chef, approached him one evening as they prepped for dinner service. "Hey, chef, you okay?" Matt asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Raphael hesitated, wondering how much he should share. Finally, he decided to open up, realizing that Matt had earned his trust over years of hard work and loyalty. "There was a girl I was helping out, a young one who'd been through some hard times," Raphael began. "She stayed with me for a while, and now she's at a safe place. I keep wondering if I could have done more." Matt nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sounds like you did a lot, Raphael. More than most people would. And if she's safe, that's a big deal. It takes courage to let someone in like that." Raphael sighed, feeling a slight relief at sharing the burden. "Yeah, I know. I just keep thinking about her out there before she found me. She was so guarded, so afraid. I hope she finds some peace." Matt clapped a hand on his shoulder, offering a warm smile. "She's lucky to have had you in her corner, chef. And maybe she'll come around, visit. You made a difference." Raphael nodded, a faint smile breaking through his worry. "Yeah, maybe you're right." As the days turned into weeks, Raphael made it a point to visit the shelter every Sunday afternoon. Mario, the shelter director, welcomed him with open arms, sharing updates on Nina's progress. Each time Raphael arrived, he would search the rooms and common spaces, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. But for the first few visits, she was nowhere to be seen, and he sensed she was keeping her distance. Mario assured him that Nina was adjusting well, that she had begun engaging in small group activities with other kids her age. She was still quiet and reserved, but she was starting to open up, little by little. Then one Sunday, as Raphael was speaking with Mario in the lounge area, he spotted her out of the corner of his eye. She was sitting on a worn armchair by the window, a book balanced on her knees, her gaze distant as she looked out at the bustling street below. Raphael's heart leaped, a surge of joy filling him at the sight of her. He hesitated, unsure if he should approach, but Mario gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Raphael walked over, his footsteps soft as he approached. Nina looked up, her eyes widening slightly in surprise, but there was a softness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "Hey, Nina," he greeted, keeping his tone gentle. "Mind if I sit with you?" She gave a small nod, shifting slightly to make room on the armchair next to her. Raphael settled into the chair, a comfortable silence stretching between them as he searched for the right words. "I've missed seeing you around," he said finally, his voice filled with sincerity. "The apartment feels quiet without you." A faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, and she looked down, fidgeting with the corner of her book. I've missed being there too. It was nice, different." Raphael nodded, sensing the weight of her words. He glanced at the book in her hands, recognizing it as one of the novels he had left out for her back at his place. "You're still reading that?" he asked with a smile. She nodded, her eyes lighting up for a brief moment. "It's a good book. Makes me feel safe, I guess. Like I'm back at your place." Raphael's heart softened. "You know, you're always welcome to visit. Anytime you want. I meant it when I said I'm just a call away." She looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and sadness in her eyes. "Thank you, Raphael, for everything." He reached out, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to thank me, Nina. I'm just glad you're safe." For the first time, Nina seemed to relax fully, leaning into his side just a little, her guard lowered in a way he hadn't seen before. They sat together for a while, watching the world outside the window. She told him about her new routine, the friends she'd made, and even a few of the things she'd learned in the shelter's after-school program. Raphael listened intently, feeling a mixture of pride and joy at her progress. As the afternoon wore on, they wandered into the small garden at the back of the shelter. It was a simple space with a few benches, some flowering bushes, and a vegetable patch that the kids helped tend to. Raphael admired the space, realizing it was the kind of quiet refuge Nina had needed all along. "Mario said you've been helping with the garden," he commented, watching as she bent down to adjust the soil around a sprouting tomato plant. She nodded, a shy smile crossing her face. "I like it here. It feels peaceful, and I'm learning a lot." Raphael chuckled softly. "You know, I could use some help with the little plants I've got in my apartment. They're barely hanging on. Maybe you can come by and teach me what you've learned." Nina laughed, a small, genuine laugh that brought a warm glow to Raphael's heart. "All right, but don't blame me if they don't make it. Some plants just don't like being indoors." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the garden, talking about everything and nothing. Raphael could see the strength in her, the resilience she'd developed in the face of hardship. She was still healing, still scared, but there was a spark in her that couldn't be extinguished. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, Raphael knew it was time to say goodbye. He walked her back inside, giving her a warm, reassuring hug before he left. "Remember, you're not alone anymore," he told her, his voice filled with conviction. "I'll be here for you always." She nodded, her face filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place, something between hope and gratitude. As he walked away, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. In the weeks that followed, Nina's visits became more frequent. She would stop by Cielo after school, sometimes helping him in the kitchen, other times just sitting at the counter and watching him work. Raphael's staff welcomed her warmly, treating her like a member of their small restaurant family. Matt, his sous chef, even taught her how to make simple dishes, and she quickly became a favorite among the staff. With each visit, Raphael watched as Nina transformed, her confidence growing as she discovered her strengths. She became more talkative, sharing her thoughts and dreams with him, revealing pieces of herself that she'd kept hidden for so long. One evening, as they cleaned up after dinner service, Nina approached Raphael with a look of determination on her face. "I think I want to stay here," she said, her voice steady. "In Seattle, I mean. I want to go to school and maybe one day work here at Cielo." Raphael felt a surge of pride. "I'd love that, Nina. You'd make a fantastic chef." She grinned, a spark of ambition lighting up her eyes. "I want to learn everything. Not just cooking, but everything. School, reading, history. I want to know it all." Raphael chuckled, his heart swelling with pride. "Then that's what you'll do. And I'll be here to help you every step of the way." As the months passed, Nina settled into her new life with a sense of purpose and hope. She began attending a local school, throwing herself into her studies with a determination that impressed her teachers. She visited Raphael often, spending time at Cielo and learning the basics of cooking and kitchen management. Her laughter became more frequent, her smiles more genuine, as she found stability and direction. One day, as she helped him prepare a batch of pasta, Nina paused, looking up at Raphael with a soft smile. "I don't feel like I'm running anymore," she said quietly, her voice filled with a peace he hadn't heard before. Raphael looked at her, his own heart brimming with pride and happiness. "You're not running, Nina. You're building a life, and it's a beautiful one." They worked in comfortable silence, the kitchen filled with the aroma of fresh basil and garlic. And as they cooked, Raphael knew that they had both come a long way, Nina from a life of fear and uncertainty, and himself from a world of solitude and longing. In helping her, he had found a renewed purpose, a sense of family he hadn't realized he'd been missing. And in him, Nina had found a mentor, a friend, and a home. Together, they had built something more than just a life. They had built a future, a promise, and a bond that would carry them both forward into whatever challenges and triumphs awaited. "You said, the journey ahead. It was nearly a year since Raphael had first seen Nina scavenging outside his bistro in the cold, rainy alley. Now, as they sat together at the small table in Raphael's apartment, sharing a quiet breakfast, it was hard to reconcile the guarded, fearful girl she had once been with the young woman before him, confident, hopeful, and filled with an unmistakable drive. Today was an important day. Nina would be standing in front of her class at school, presenting her project on the history of Seattle's Pike Place Market. She'd spent weeks researching and preparing, and Raphael had been there each night, encouraging her, helping her gather notes, even practicing with her as she nervously rehearsed her speech in the warmth of his apartment. This presentation was a symbol of how far she'd come. She had embraced her school life, thrived in her studies, and was now taking steps to share her voice and story with the world around her. As she buttered her toast, Raphael noticed a faint shadow of anxiety in her eyes, a remnant of the old Nina that sometimes surfaced. He reached across the table, giving her hand a comforting squeeze. "You're going to be great," he said, his tone reassuring. "You've worked so hard on this. Just remember that everyone in that room wants to hear what you have to say." She gave a small, nervous smile, glancing down at her plate. "I know. It's just, sometimes I still feel like I'm not like the other kids, like I don't really belong." Raphael shook his head, his voice filled with gentle conviction. "You belong there, Nina. You belong just as much as anyone else. And more importantly, you have something real to share, your own experiences, your perspective. It's what makes you special." Nina looked up at him, her face softening as she absorbed his words. "Thank you, Raphael. I don't know what I'd do without you." He smiled warmly. "You'd do just fine, I think. But I'm glad I get to be here for it." Later that day, Raphael was busy with the lunchtime rush at Cielo when he felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. Quickly glancing at the screen, he saw a message from Nina. It went great. The teacher even asked if I'd join the debate team. A broad grin spread across his face, and for a moment, the bustling noise of the kitchen faded into the background. He replied with a quick thumbs up and a message of congratulations before slipping his phone back into his pocket and returning to work, the pride and joy he felt buoying him through the busy day. The bond between Raphael and Nina had grown into something deep and unwavering. Though he hadn't adopted her officially, in every way that mattered, she was family. She came to Cielo nearly every evening after school, sometimes helping him in the kitchen, other times curled up with a book at the counter as she waited for him to finish his shift. The staff adored her. She was like a little sister or daughter to them all, her presence adding a new warmth to the restaurant. That evening, as they walked back to Raphael's apartment together, Nina bubbled with excitement, recounting every detail of her presentation. Her cheeks were flushed with pride, her eyes bright as she spoke about the praise she'd received from her classmates and teacher. "I never thought I'd enjoy standing in front of everyone like that," she admitted, laughing as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "It felt, I don't know, powerful." Raphael chuckled, feeling the surge of pride. "That's because you're powerful, Nina. You've come a long way, and you're only getting started." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, the city lights casting a warm glow over them as they made their way down the familiar streets. Then Nina's expression grew serious, her steps slowing as they neared the apartment building. "Raphael, I've been thinking," she began, her voice hesitant, "about the future." He stopped, turning to face her with a curious expression. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. I want to keep going, keep learning. I want to make something of myself. I used to think that I was stuck, that I'd never get out of the mess I was born into. But now, I want to be someone who helps others, like you helped me." Raphael's heart swelled with emotion. "Nina, that's an incredible goal. And I have no doubt you'll achieve it." She smiled shyly. "I was thinking, maybe I could study social work, or maybe even law. I want to help kids who don't have anyone, like I didn't. I want them to feel like they belong somewhere, like they have someone they can trust." He nodded, deeply moved by her words. "That's a beautiful goal, Nina, and I'll support you every step of the way." They continued to walk, the weight of her words hanging in the air, filled with a sense of purpose and possibility. Nina's dreams were no longer confined to mere survival. She was ready to give back, to use her experiences to help others. Months passed, and Nina thrived in her studies and her new life. Raphael watched with pride as she tackled every challenge with resilience, working tirelessly toward her goals. She joined the debate team, throwing herself into each argument and presentation with a newfound confidence, her voice strong and clear. And though life had scared her, she was no longer defined by those scars. She had transformed them into strength, a quiet, powerful resolve that inspired those around her. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Raphael returned home to find Nina sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of books and papers spread out before her. She was working on a research project for school, her brow furrowed in concentration as she scribbled notes in the margins. He smiled, grabbing a glass of water as he watched her, marveling at the transformation he'd witnessed. This was the same girl he had once found in the alley, searching through garbage with hollow eyes and a guarded heart. Now she was driven, focused, and filled with a purpose that went far beyond her own survival. "Burning the midnight oil," he teased, setting his glass down and peeking over her shoulder. She laughed, rolling her eyes playfully. "Just trying to keep up with all the reading. Who knew history could be so complicated?" Raphael chuckled, ruffling her hair affectionately. "I think you're doing just fine." They shared a comfortable silence as Nina continued working, Raphael settling into the couch with a contented sigh. After a while, she set down her pen and looked at him, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "You know, Raphael," she began, her tone soft, "I never really told you what it meant to me, finding someone like you. Someone who cared. I don't know if I'd be here, doing all of this, if you hadn't helped me." He felt a lump rise in his throat, touched by her words. "Nina, I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone should do, help someone in need." She shook her head, her gaze steady. "No, you did more than that. You didn't just give me a place to stay. You gave me a chance to believe in myself. You taught me that I was worth something. And I want to be that for someone else, someday." Raphael reached out, taking her hand in his voice filled with emotion. "Nina, you already are that for others. You've inspired everyone here at Cielo. And you've shown me what true resilience looks like. You've got a heart that can change the world." They sat together in silence, the weight of their shared journey filling the room with a quiet warmth. They had both been transformed by this bond, Raphael finding purpose beyond his work, and Nina finding a new sense of belonging, a family where she had once felt alone. As Nina grew older, she continued to visit Raphael, even after moving out to attend college on a scholarship. She chose to study social work and criminal justice, her experiences fueling her desire to make a difference in the lives of others. Raphael visited her campus often, attending her debates and presentations, always cheering her on as her greatest supporter. Years passed, and Nina became a beacon of hope and strength, working tirelessly to help foster children and young people find the support and care they needed. Her work brought her recognition and respect, but she always remained humble, always remembering the kindness and patience that Raphael had shown her. One day, years after that rainy night in the alley, Nina returned to Cielo, now a confident young woman with a purpose as strong as her spirit. She embraced Raphael, her heart filled with gratitude and love for the man who had changed her life. "Thank you, Raphael," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, "for giving me a future." He smiled, his eyes misty with pride. "Thank you, Nina, for showing me what family truly means." They stood together in the familiar warmth of the bistro, surrounded by the quiet hum of the kitchen and the comforting sense of spices and simmering sauces. Together, they had built a family, not through blood, but through love, trust, and the unwavering support that had carried them both through life's darkest moments. As they stood there, Raphael knew that he had not only given Nina a second chance, but she had given him something equally precious, a reason to believe in the power of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond they now shared. Their journey had been filled with hardship and healing, but it was far from over. They had many more memories to make, lives to impact, and love to share. And no matter where life took them, they would always carry each other's hearts, forever bound by the promise of hope and the strength of family they had built together.